Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. My name's Nader. In this video, we're going to go over some exercises for objects. In the previous video, we went through kind of the concepts of objects and some examples. So this one's going to be just a lot of extra practice. I have a warm-up exercises, 3 exercises to go through after that, as well as a fun bonus. So if you want more practice with objects, let's get to it. All right, so as with the other exercise videos, as I mentioned, we have a warm-up, 3 exercises over here, and then a bonus to wrap things up. So the same structure as the others. If you haven't seen those before, I have a bunch of comments up here at the top of each of the exercises. We'll go through it together real quick. I'll read it out, give you a chance to try it yourself. You can pause the video, and then we'll go through the solution together, or at least one of the many possible solutions together as a group. So for this warm-up exercise, we want to first create an object called Mexico with the following properties. So remember, a property is a key and a value pair. Okay, so we want an ID that's going to be 24. We want a name that's Mexico, a capital that's Mexico City, and then neighbors, which looks to be an array of different countries. Then we want to print out this object, Mexico, that we created above to the screen. We want to change the ID to be 24 instead of 25. So we're doing some manipulation of the values for this associated key. We want to then add Honduras to the list of neighbors for Mexico, which is this array right here. And then finally, we want to print out the object again to make sure that our changes actually took place. So a little bit of tricks here with the arrays and stuff, but give it a shot. And if you get stuck, definitely unpause the video and we can go through it together. Okay, so let's just start creating this object to start. So step 1, let's create this object so that we can start playing around with it. So I'm going to create a const, I'll call it Mexico, and this is going to be an object. So we use curly brackets for the object. I like to kind of split it up so I have one property per line, which is a key value pair, just so it's nice and easy to read. The keys don't technically need to be double quoted as strings. JavaScript does that internally for us, so I'm just going to kind of go with that syntax. I'm going to say ID, this is going to be the number 24. Name, this is going to be the string Mexico. And here I have to put a string on the right hand side for the value because the value can technically be anything. The keys are always strings 100% of the time in JavaScript. So let's go with capital, and this is going to be Mexico City, and we'll do neighbors. I'll just copy this since I don't want you to watch me type, and this is going to be this array with these countries: USA, Guatemala, and Belize. Okay, and then we want to print out Mexico to the screen, so we can do console.log, and we can console log Mexico. So I'll just pull up my terminal and we can kind of see what this looks like once we log it out together. So if I do an ls, make sure I'm in the correct directory here, and I am. I have all my exercises in this case. I'm going to use node, and I'm going to do the warm-up exercise. And you can see that we get kind of a nice representation of this object, which is pretty much a duplicate of what we see right here. So at least we're getting this object printed out to the screen. So again, this is a number value. These are 2 string values, and this is an array of strings for neighbors. But the keys themselves are all strings. Okay, so next we want to kind of go with step 3. So I'll just scroll down a little bit to give myself some room. We want to change the ID value to be 25. So right now it's 24. So to change a value for a associated key inside of an object in JavaScript, we kind of have 2 ways to go about this. We can say Mexico, and we can say at the ID like this, and we can give it a string in square brackets. So we're basically indexing kind of into this object. We can say equals 25. So that's one option. The other option is we can just use the shorthand syntax, which I prefer, which I'll kind of use going forward, and I'll point out where we can't do this. These 2 lines are the same thing. Okay, they do the exact same thing. In fact, me kind of having both these lines run after the other is not going to do anything because they both do the exact same thing. So I technically don't even need to comment it out. It's just one of these is redundant because they do the exact same thing. So the second thing we want to do here, though, is we want to add Honduras to the list of neighbors to Mexico. So right here we have a list of 3 strings. So this I purposely made this a little bit tricky just so you can get some practice kind of combining these concepts. But here we have an array of strings and we want to add a new string to that array of strings. So let's think about this. Whenever you see things like this, what you generally want to do is kind of break it down into steps that you know you can do. So let's imagine that we just have this array. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of code this out. Imagine that we have this array. How do we add Honduras to the end of this array? Well, in the array video, we saw that we can do .push, right? And we can do .push Honduras, just like that, right? And this will add this string to the end, right after Belize, of this array. So we can do that. So we know how to do that with an array. But this is not going to really work because we don't, how do we access this array? Well, to access this array, we need to find it using the key. And that's located at neighbors. So we can do this. We can say Mexico dot, and I can use the dot syntax here or the square bracket syntax, so either of these syntaxes will work. Mexico at neighbors. And what is this going to be? This is going to be the array. So this is actually this behind the scenes, right? When I'm accessing neighbors or asking for give me the value at neighbors for Mexico, I'm going to be given that array object, right? And if this is an array, I can do a dot push on it, right? And I can push Honduras onto the end of this neighbors array. So I'm saying go to the Mexico object, grab the neighbors key and give me the value, which is this array, and then push the Honduras string to the end of it, okay, which is effectively going to be this line right here. So I'm going to comment that out just so that we have this all cleared out, and I'm going to console log out Mexico to the screen for a final time to see if we actually have the correct object. I'll just clear out my screen here and run this one more time, and we can see that we have the object right here, which is the Mexico object, and after we do our transformations on it, which is namely changing the ID to 25 on lines 26 or 27, they both do the same thing, so I can comment either of those out, and line 32 is what pushes Honduras to the end of the neighbors array. We have this new object, so this has been permanently changed to have these new values in them. We don't have access to the old values anymore because we didn't store them anymore. So 24 no longer exists anywhere, and this array has now been permanently changed in memory to be of length 4 with Honduras tagged on to the end. All right, I hope that was a good warm up for you. Once you're ready, we'll go to the first exercise. Okay. So for this one, again, I'll read through it and I'll give you a chance to try it yourself, and you can pause the video. So for this one, we want to create an object called myPet, very similar to how we just created the Mexico object. And this is going to have the following properties here. We're going to have name, which is the string pseudo, type, which is the string dog, breed, which is the string poodle, age, which is the number 5, and then friends, which is a list of strings, very similar to how we had the list of strings for neighbors. My pet's friends in this case are bit, byte, and data. Okay. Then we want to print out my pet to the screen. We want to add a new property, which has the key of color and the value of black to this object, my pet. We want to change the breed to be a beagle instead of poodle. We want to remove data from the list of friends for my pet, which is this last friend. And then we want to print out this kind of transformed object, my pet, with all of these changes added to it. Finally, we want to do one more thing. We want to add chip to the end, and we want to print out my pet to make sure everything has been updated correctly. So quite a lot going on here. Definitely lots of manipulation happening. So give it your best shot, and then we'll go through it together. All right, so let's start this off by creating the object myPet. So I'm going to say const myPet, and this is going to be an object, so we can use this syntax to create an object, and we're going to give it the properties, in this case line by line, with a key, colon, and then a value. So the key is name, value is pseudo. The next key is type, and the value is dog. The next value is breed, and the value is poodle. And note, again, I can kind of technically, if I really want to, I can do this kind of thing, right, where the key is a string, because that's actually what happens behind the scenes. When I save my file, you'll see my editor will just remove it just to make it easier for me to read. It's going to scroll down a little bit. The age here is going to be a number 7, and then the friends key is going to have this array of wonderful names for your pet, bit, byte, and data. Okay, so then we want to print it out to the screen. So I'm going to say console.log my pet. All right, so I'll just scroll this down a little bit, open up my terminal, and clear it out. And I'm going to do node exercise 1 and see what we get. Okay, perfect. So we have kind of this object logged out, and all the values are in there that we were asked to put in there. And now we can start doing some object manipulation. So I'm just going to scroll down a little bit more so we can see step 3, so I have some room to code. And our next task is to add a new property with the key of color and the value of black. So I'll do this in the short form. I'll say my pet at the key of color, so dot color. Yeah, the key of color. It didn't autocomplete for me and I got tripped up, but we're adding a new key. And this is going to equal to black. I'll make sure I spell that correctly. Now this seems kind of weird, right? Because if you read this, you'll be like, okay, at least this is how I read it. It's like, find the key of color inside of my pet and set it to black. But what's curious about this, and the reason, again, my brain got tripped up reading this, even as I was doing this right now with you, was there is no key of color right now, right? That's the kind of curious thing about this statement right here on line 34, right? So what JavaScript does is if the key doesn't exist, it's going to set it for you automatically and set that value. And we can use either of the syntaxes, right? We can use this one or we can use this one right here, just like that. And these are going to do the same thing. Okay, so both of these work the same way because the string for the key is just one word. I'm going to comment out one just so we don't get too confused with too much stuff on the screen. And then we want to change the breed to be beagle. So this key does exist, right? We have a breed of poodle already, so we're not setting a new key. However, the syntax is the same. We can just do my pet dot breed, and this can equal to beagle, just like that, right? So we're saying change the breed to now point to the string beagle instead of the string poodle, and we're going to lose kind of the string poodle eventually. And then finally, before we want to print this out to see what we get, we want to remove data from the list of friends for my pet. Okay, so let's think about this for a second. So friends right now is this array right here, right? We have bit, byte, and data. Data is the last item in this array. So the question really is, how do we remove the last item in an array? If you think back to the array video, try to see if you can come up with the answer, or looking at the documentation on something like MDN. So to do this, we want to pop off the last element using the pop method on arrays. So we can do it like this. I'm going to say my pet dot friends, which is the array itself, and then we're going to say dot pop, just like that. And this is going to remove the last item on that array and give it back to us. But in this case, we're not going to use it. It's just going to remove it permanently from that array. And this only works for the last item in the case of pop. Okay, so let's print out my pet and see what we get. Console.log my pet, and I will clear my console and run this one more time. So let's see if our changes took place. So this is our original object, and we changed a few things. So the first thing we changed is the breed has been changed to beagle, so we're pretty good there. The color, not the color, what was it? Yeah, the color, sorry, that is one of them, was added, and you can see that this is a new property that doesn't exist in the previous object. So we actually added this in the same way that we would update a key, which is what's happening on line 34. And again, line 35 would actually do the exact same thing. Okay, and friends, which is our last thing that we changed, we removed data from the end of it by using pop on the friends array. Okay, so finally, how do we add chip, which is number 7, to the list of friends? We did this in the previous one, but we'll do it together really quick. We do myPet.friends.push, and we can do chip to the end. And then we can console log out my pet one more time, and I'll run this, and then we will get almost cut off there with my face, but chip has been added after we removed data, as you can see, onto the friends array. Okay. This was intentionally kind of made a bit tricky so that you have to get practice changing stuff, adding stuff, popping stuff, pushing stuff. And this is pretty common as you start getting more experience with JavaScript. These object manipulation tasks are extremely important as we start working with full stack web development, for example, or just really any development with JavaScript, especially things like backend development, if that's something that would interest you. This is similar behavior for most languages, quite honestly. So other languages don't really have objects. They have things that we're going to look at in the next few videos, but the concepts of manipulating kind of these data structures is very, very similar. And if you can conceptually kind of slowly wrap your mind around these, it'll really go a long way. Okay, so let's go to the second exercise. Oh my gosh, lots of text on this one. So you can see I had fun making these exercise videos. So for this one, we want to create these three objects. Okay, banana with a name of banana, quantity of 1, and a price of 1.95. And we kind of do the same thing for candy and apple. Then we want to create another object, and we want to call this object store. Okay, and the store is going to have the following properties here, right? Very similar to what we did before. It's going to have a number, a couple strings, and then an array. Keep note though that this array is using variables, specifically these variables that I asked you to declare earlier. These are not the string banana, apple, and candy. These are the variables banana, apple, and candy, which are actually pointing to these objects behind the scenes. Okay, it's a pretty important point, and we'll see the difference that makes. Then we want to print out store, make sure it looks correct. And we want to then print out only all the product objects in the store, which is these ones. And then print out specifically the third product object by itself in the store. And then we want to change the price of the banana object in the store to be 1.75 instead of 1.95. Okay. Then we want to print out both store and banana, so the entire store object as well as the banana object. And then we want to print out, change the price of the candy object directly to be 4.99, and we can print out store and candy just like we did with store and banana. So there's a lot of manipulation happening here. The difference between this one and the previous one is that these are starting to see this idea of nested objects, where we can have values inside of object properties that are also objects themselves, which starts to get into kind of this inception land of objects with objects with objects. And this is going to get us a really good head start as we start working with web development shortly. Okay, so give that a shot yourself. Take your time with this one. There's a lot going on, and then we'll go through it together. All right, so let's kind of start right here. I'm actually just going to copy these lines and cheat a little bit here. So I'll just kind of get rid of these, and I actually got rid of my const. And then that is step 1 for me right there. So with that out of the way, I want to create my store. So I'm going to say const store, and it's going to be an object. It's going to be a store number, and this is going to be 5. We're going to have a location city, and this is going to be a string Milan, and we're going to have a location country. Sorry, there's a lot of text on the screen here, so it's kind of going off the screen. I hope you can still see that clearly. And the location country, is going to be Italy. I'll scroll this down shortly. And then we're going to have a products key, which is going to be this list. So critically, this list is going to kind of scroll down a little bit here so we can see a bit more clearly. Is the variables banana, apple, and candy, as I mentioned. So this is not the string banana like this. That's totally different. This is the variable banana, apple, and candy. So really what this array is it's an array of objects. Okay? Because you can think of it as this banana is really this object right here. Apple is really this object right here, and candy is really this object right here. So you could technically think of it as like copying and pasting these objects into this array, where we have these three huge objects in this array. So this array's length is 3, but there's objects in each spot instead of just strings or numbers or something like that. Okay, so I'm going to save this, and I'm going to bring up my terminal here. I'm going to run exercise 2. And of course I didn't print out store, so I'm going to console log out store every single time. You got to make a joke out of that at some point. And you can see that we have our entire object, right? So there's quite a lot happening here. I just want you to kind of look at this and really try to wrap your mind around what's happening, specifically products, right? And how this is working. The more you can slowly start to understand how this product list is working and what these variables are pointing to, the easier these next few numbers that we're going to go through are going to be. And as well, it'll help you understand much more as we start nesting these even further in the future. Because you can get quite gnarly where you can have arrays of objects which have arrays in them, which have objects in them, and the better you get at indexing into these, the better. Okay, so now for step 4, we want to print out all of the product objects inside of store. Okay, so this is going to be tricky. I'm actually going to copy this line 4, and I'm going to kind of come down here and give myself a lot of room just so you can see this with a lot of room on my screen, because there's quite a lot happening. So we want to print out all the product objects inside of the store object itself. So we know that we can loop through a list using a for loop in JavaScript. That might be useful for this. Technically speaking, we can index into products. So we could do something like this. We could say console.log, and we could say store.products, and we could index into it directly because we know there are 3 things in here. So we could say at 0, we could say at 1, and at 2. And if I do this, what you'll notice is that we'll get these 3 products printed out. I'll just put a console log right here just so you can see the separation here. But what you'll see is that these 3 objects are being printed out. So this is technically one way to do it. However, if we were to add more products to this list, this would quickly break down, right? Because we would either have more products or less products. So a better way to approach this would be to use a loop. So let me do that real quick. So I'll say for let index equals 0. I want to loop 3 times, but I don't want to hard code this. I want to make this work even if I change the length of products. So I want to say while I is less than store.products.length. Now there's a lot happening here. This is saying go to the store objects, go to the products key and give me the value, which is an array. All arrays have a length property, and we can use that, and that'll change dynamically as things get pushed and popped and shifted and unshifted onto this products array. Okay, and we want to increase I by 1 every single time. Now we can basically do the same thing right here. I'll copy that just so you can see. We can see console log store.products at, and then this is the only part that changes. Instead of hard coding this to be a number, we can dynamically use I. And this I is going to change depending on how long the list of products is. And what we'll see is if I run this, we'll get the exact same result, which is amazing. Okay. If you did it this way, definitely the correct answer as well. However, I would encourage you to start looking at things from a efficiency point of view, at least where you can, to start thinking, okay, this seems a little bit repetitive. Is there a construct that I know of that might be able to give me the numbers 0, 1, and 2 in a kind of more dynamic way, so I don't have to keep adding these lines or removing these lines as we add or remove products. All right, perfect. So that was step 4. If I'll scroll back up here. So then we're saying only print out the 3rd product object in store. So let me do another console log here really quick. I'll say console.log, and then I'll say like 5. This is just step 5. So how do we print out the third object, which is candy? Well, we know that we can go to the store, we can grab the products, and we can index into it directly. And to grab the third item from a list, we give it the index of 2. Okay, so if I run this, what we'll see is that I indeed get candy, which is the third product in the list. And this is for question number 5. All right, perfect. Let's go through the last few of these together. It's quite a long one, but good practice. Then we want to change the price of the banana object through the store object to be 1.75. So instead of directly doing banana.price is 1.75, let's do it through the store. Okay, that's where the trick for this one is. I'm just going to bring this one down here just so that we can see a bit more clearly the comments for it. So when you see a question like this, the first thing we want to do is get access to the thing that we want to change. So how do we get access to the banana object in the first place? Well, the banana object is the first item in products. So how do we get access to the first item in an array in an object? Well, the object is store. The key we're interested in is products. This is going to give us the value, which is a array. And if I hover over this, Visual Studio Code will sometimes help you out and be like, yes, this has name, quantity, and price inside of it, which is the object. And we want to change the price. So we'll say dot price. We want to change it to 1.75 equals 1.75, just like that. Okay. So we're saying go to store, go to products, get that array, and change the price. I actually made a mistake here. We want the first product, which is product at 0. Okay. You'll notice that you probably make these typos all the time. I definitely do, and as I run my code, I'll get those errors. But the more that you practice, the less that the more common ones will happen, and you'll always end up getting errors at some point. So let me rephrase this one. We have store. We're asking for the products array, specifically the first product. And we know that that is an object. So we're going to get back this object. And then we're asking for the price key. And we're going to change its value to be 1.75. Okay. And then we're saying print out both store and banana. So I'll just console log out store. And then I'll also console log out banana. What I'll do is I'll just kind of comment out these other console logs here, just so that we can kind of have some space here, because I'm going to run into my face on the right side of the screen. And then we'll start kind of from this part of the exercises. This actually still kind of goes overboard a little bit, so I'll just rerun this one more time. Okay, so after we change the object, let's see what we get. You can see that the interesting thing here is we changed this product, which is the first product, inside of store to be a price of 1.75. But in doing so, we also changed banana, which is the original object. Okay, so not only did we change kind of this thing in here in this object store, but somehow while we changed that, we also changed this. And that's how objects and arrays work in JavaScript. They are not copies of each other. They're pointing to the same blocks of memory, the same data. So if we're changing something here that's an object or an array, we're changing it to wherever is pointing to that object, right? So in this case, banana being changed through store is changing this object right here, which is anything that points to banana in the future is now going to have that new price associated with it. So it's changed here. It's also changed in the actual physical banana object behind the scenes as well. That's what I wanted to demonstrate with this one. Just to show you that one more time, I want to do the same thing with candy and change the candy object price to be 4.99 and then print out store and candy. So to do that, we're going to say store dot products, and then candy is the third item, which is at index 2. And then we're going to say dot price is equal to 4.99. And then we're going to console.log out store and candy. what I'll do is I'll get rid of one of these console logs. Hopefully that works out. So we can see that banana has been changed to 1.75. Here is our store object, where candy and banana have been changed to 1.75 and 4.99, and candy has also been changed. Quite a lot going on here. I was struggling to kind of give as much practice as possible with this video. I hope that kind of helps a little bit, so you can see that changing one thing in an object will change anything that points to that object. In this case, these variables are effectively pointing to these objects still, right? So changing them through store still has the impact of changing it out here as well. Okay, if this is a bit to wrap your mind around, definitely don't worry. You can rewatch this a few times or watch the objects video before this so you can see the memory representation as well. But this is a very, very common behavior that we will see all over the place. And sometimes this behavior is not what you want, and you instead want to maybe make a copy, which is a topic we'll get into in future videos as well. Okay, let's go to the third exercise. So for this exercise, quite a lot going on here. It looks a little bit shorter, but I assure you this is a little bit challenging in its own way as well. We're introducing kind of a new concept in this one. So for this one, we want to create a object called house for sale with the following properties. So area, that's 940, value, that's 320,000, street name, 5th Street, built, the string 2012, owner, which is an object with a couple of properties, and then offers, which is an array of numbers. Then we want to print out this object to make sure we have it kind of created correctly. We want to use delete to delete the key built, which will also delete its corresponding value, 2012. We want to change the age of owner inside of this object to be 30 instead of 29. So in this case, name is Blake, age is 29. We want to change this value of this key age to be 30. And then we want to print out the maximum offer price. Now this is probably the trickiest part of this particular exercise because I added a little extra caveat here that we need to use the reduce function. If you haven't seen that before, we have a video of that on the channel that we went through together along with kind of the exercises for it. But this is one efficient way to get something like the maximum in an array. Very useful to know how to do that. And then we want to add a new property called sale space price, which is going to be 312,000. And be aware that this has a space in it, so we're going to have to use kind of the square bracket notation for that. And we finally want to print out the resulting house for sale object after all these changes are done. So this definitely is going to take a little while. I encourage you to give it a shot, and then we'll go through it together. Perfect. So I'll start with house for sale, and this is going to be an object. So I'm just going to quickly add these keys. So we're going to do area, which is the number 940. The next key is value, which is the number 320,000. There is a way to make these numbers look better, which we'll get to later. That's a newer syntax. There's street name, which is going to be the string 5th Street, if I can spell. Oh my gosh, 5th Street. And built, which is the string 2012. Then we have, do I have an error here? Oh, I put a comma, look at that. My editor helping me out. Owner, which is this object. I'll just copy and paste this to speed it up a little bit. An object with the key of name, value of Blake, key of age, value of 29, and then finally an offers key, which is this list of numbers right here with these 4 large numbers inside of it. So this is a pretty practical example. You can probably imagine building some kind of real estate app or something like that, or home sale app where you can kind of see these different houses on the screen, and each of them has their own kind of bundle of values in this case. And you can kind of display them in various ways once we start to see things like web pages and HTML, but even just to create a text-based program to sort through these different houses, very useful to kind of learn how to manipulate these objects. Okay, so we want to then print this to the screen to make sure we didn't mess anything up. So I'll console log out my house for sale. Perfect. I'll just pull up my terminal here. and make sure I'm in the correct folder, and I'll run node and exercise3.js, and there we go. We have our wonderful object printed out with all the correct properties that we listed up here. So I'll just scroll this down a little bit just so that we can get to step 3. Okay, so next we're asked to delete the property with the key built. Okay, so we want to delete this entire property built with a value of 2021. To do that, we just use the delete keyword, and then we take the key of the object to delete. So in this case, we want to delete from the house for sale object. And we can do this in 2 ways, a square bracket notation with the strings, or I like to do this in this case with the dot. We want to delete the built property in this case. So this is saying find the built key and the value and then delete them both, the entire property together. Cool, so that's step 3. Then we want to change the age of the owner to be 30 inside of house for sale. So in this case, owner is this key right here with the value, which is another object. Okay, so we saw previously that you want to kind of use the dot notation or the square bracket notation to index into further objects. So if you imagine that this is just an object on its own, very similar to how we kind of had banana before, to access name, you would do owner.name. To access age, you would do owner.age, and you get 29. Okay, so we can do the same thing, but with another layer of nesting with house for sale at the start. So we can say house for sale dot owner, and then we want to change the age. So we'll say dot age is now equal to 30. So go inside of house for sale, find the owner property, owner key, and then value pair in this case, and we want to change the age key value to be 30. Okay, so we're looking for owner. In this case, I'm just going to repeat it again because it does get kind of confusing when you see this all in one go. We're looking for owner inside of house for sale. We're grabbing that value, which is an object, and then we can do dot notation on that object, and we're grabbing the age from that object, which is now being set to the number 30 instead of 29. Perfect. So that is step 4. Now for step 5, which is print out the maximum offer price, but we're asked to use reduce. Okay, so for this, I just want to kind of take it one step at a time. So for an array like this, if we do dot reduce, we know reduce takes a function and a starting value. So let's say the starting value is 0, okay? Because we know that these are kind of positive numbers. We don't really need the starting value in this case, but I'll leave it there just for sake of completion to be consistent with the previous videos. There's other ways you could do this. If this had negative values, for example, that would make it work. But since we know it has positive values, the minimum it could possibly be is 0. So in this reduce, we're going to get the kind of the max, which we're going to keep track of, and then the number, or I guess in this case, the price that we're looking at right now. So we want to say if the max is less than the price, so if the price that we're looking at right now is greater than the max, so I could have done this another way as well. I could say if the price is greater than the max that we're seeing so far, or the max is less than the price we're looking at right now, then we want to return the price, which is going to be the new max. And if that is not the case, then we just want to pass through the max directly like this. Okay, so this is saying go through all of these, keep track of the max, which starts at 0. If the max is less than the price that we're looking at right now, then kind of change it to be the new price in the next loop around. Otherwise, keep it the same. So it's gonna max is going to start off at 0. Then we're going to ask is 0 less than 290,000, and it is. So we're going to return 290,000. We're going to compare that to 295, and then compare that to 315 and 312, etc. And at the very end, we'll have our actual maximum number in this array. That's a bit confusing. Like I mentioned, you can probably go through the reduce videos and exercises just to get a bit more practice with that. So that's how we would do it with this array. We don't really have this array. We want to do it on kind of this object, which has the key of offers, which has this as a value, right? So in order to get access to this, we don't do this like this. We would say house for sale dot offers dot reduce, right? Because house for sale dot offers is that array that we just had. Okay, I'm going to assign that to a value. I'll just say const max price, and then I'm going to console log it out. Max price. Okay. I'm just gonna scroll this down a little bit just so you can see the code kind of lined up like that. And I'll run this one more time, and we can see that the max price in this particular array of offers is 315,000. Okay, perfect. Next, step 6, we want to add a new property, sale price, to be 312,000. Now notice sale price has a space in it. Okay, I did this on purpose so we can practice with the other notation because we can't use a dot notation to do this. So I'm just going to copy this key right here, and I'm going to say house for sale at the sale price is equal to 312,000. Okay, we can't use the dot notation because there's a space in this key name. Okay, perfect. Then finally we can print out our final result, and we'll see what we get. Hopefully it's changed to have the correct values, and we can see that this was the previous object, this is the max, and then this is the new object right here. Okay, and you can see that since this has a space, kind of Node.js in this case is printing it out with a string just to be extra explicit, since technically all these keys are also strings. Okay, that was definitely a challenging one. If you even got a little bit of it, then give yourself a pat on the back. But rewatch parts of this video if you're stuck on any parts of that. Perfect. So I couldn't resist again. I had a bonus exercise for this one because I really think this is such a central concept in JavaScript, and we're going to see it so often again and again. So please join me for the bonus, which we'll get to here. I'll just close this off so we have a bit of space. Okay, so this one's not too long. It's just conceptually going to be hopefully a little bit mind-blowing to you. And when I first started seeing this, I still remember I had kind of those like, oh my gosh moments, right? Like the light bulbs going off in my head, and things slowly started to click together. And it's nice because if you've been kind of following this series so far and you've gotten to this point, or even if you've kind of studied all the topics up to here, including like loops and arrays and kind of the more basic constructs like conditional statements, you'll start to see that, wow, this is really interesting. This actually makes a lot of sense. And like the console that we've been using and some of the other functions that we've been using so far, I can kind of see how they might work right behind the scenes. So that was just me getting excited. I'll just go to the actual definition of this bonus exercise. So we want to create an object called myConsole. Then we want to assign myConsole the key log with a value that's an arrow function. Okay, so this is the first time we're seeing this. So far we've seen the values be things like arrays or other objects, or numbers or strings, but this is a function, an arrow function, as the value for this key, which is also possible. This arrow function is going to have one parameter called message, and the function will just console log out the message. Okay, not too complicated a function. And then we're going to see how we can call this function, and we should be able to do something like this once we've constructed this object correctly. And once you've done this, I'd like you to think about, how might the actual built-in console that JavaScript has actually work, right? Is it something that might be similar to this? Tease your brain a little bit and kind of see if you can get those juices flowing to get even a little bit of an answer for that one. And it's definitely very insightful. I'll give you a moment to try that out and we'll go through it together. Okie dokes. So let's create an object. We'll call it myConsole. This is going to be an object. Perfect. So we want to have myConsole have the key of log. So we do that like this. So that's the key on the left-hand side. And then the value is going to be an arrow function. Okay, so this is going to look a little bit weird, but let's kind of go with it. So an arrow function looks kind of like this, right? So this is the key on the left-hand side, and the value on the right-hand side is this arrow function, just like we can have any value on the right-hand side. I'm just going to give myself some space here so we can kind of treat this like we normally would write a function. If you haven't seen these functions before, we have a video on the channel that goes through kind of how functions work and some exercises for them, specifically with arrow functions, so you can get some practice there. So that said, this function is going to have one parameter, and it's going to be called message. So I'm going to put that right here. It's called message. And all it's going to do is console log out that message. So console.log out the message. All right, and that's it. Okay, so now the interesting question is, how do we use this, right? I kind of give you a hint here, so let's try this out. I'm gonna kind of copy this. I'm gonna going to take my console object, which is the one that we just created, and I'm going to do .log to access the value at this log key, right? And since it's a function, I can actually call this function using parentheses. And this function takes has one parameter, so we can give it this argument of a string right here to fill in for message. So let's see what happens if we do this. I want you to note that I don't have a console log in this right now that I'm using, right? I have it in this function, but I'm just doing a my console.log here. So let's see what happens if we try to run this code. So I'm going to do node and bonus.exercise, and look at that. We get our message here, hello friend, printed out, right? So if I do a bunch of exclamations and I rerun this, it just works as a console log would. So all that's happening here is that function is being called, and we're basically passing this message to this message here, and it's being console logged out using the built-in console.log. So how is this working, right? I want to show you something really, really mind-blowing, okay? I'm going to comment out this line, and I'm going to console.log out something that's going to look extremely strange, but I hope that your mind explodes a little bit with just like the oohs and ahs. I'm going to console log out console, which is the built-in console object. Okay, so if I save this and I run this, it's a little bit cut off here by my little bubble head in the bottom, but hopefully you can see, right? This is an object called console that's built into JavaScript, and it has all of these properties, right? And the interesting thing about these properties is that they're all functions, right? So look at this top one, right? This top one is called log. That's exactly what we have right here, right? Interestingly, you're probably wondering, well, if we use console log in our own log function, and what does console.log use in its own console log function to do the logging, because it doesn't have access to console log? So that's definitely an exercise for an advanced JavaScript video where we would have to get into the internals of these things, which is very interesting. But definitely take note of this, right? All console is an object that's pre-programmed and provided to us by just JavaScript in general, in this case by Node.js, and there's another one for the browser, and most kind of Java or JavaScript environments provide this to us. It's technically not part of the language, but we can kind of assume that it is for our purposes. And it has these keys and values, and they're all just functions, and they work differently, and we can kind of look them up and see how they all work. So if you think about console.log, we're asking to go to the console object and find the log key and give us that value, which is this function right here, right? So I want to just pull up the documentation kind of to wrap up this video so we can actually see this working from the perspective of the documentation such as MDN. So I'm just going to pull up Google. I'm going to search for JavaScript console. And I love the MDN documentation. You probably see me pull it up a whole bunch of times. So I'm going to go to the console web APIs, MDN web docs. And over here, just zoom in a little bit so we can see this a little bit better. You can see that we have a console object that provides access to the browser's debugging console. And it works from browser to browser. It changes depending on where it lives. But you can see kind of on the left-hand side over here, these methods, right, which are those keys and values, the properties, are listed, right? We have log, and if I click on log right here, look at that, we have console.log. It's a method that outputs a message to the web console, right? And we can have some examples how we can use it. We have the parameters, and we have all sorts of interesting information here. Now, I encourage you just to read through this just kind of for fun, to get used to reading documentation and kind of seeing things that you might not understand right now that you can tuck back into the back of your mind and kind of pull back in the future. But the central premise is, and I just love repeating this because it's just so amazing, console is just an object. And now that we've learned objects, we know that this is just another property that in this case is a function as a value for that key log, right? I encourage you to look at these other ones to see how they might work and kind of the different use cases for them, because there definitely is more than just log, and even log can kind of be spiced up and we can add some fancy things to it if you really want to get deep into it. So I hope that was valuable for you. If you found these exercises interesting or useful, like the video and subscribe to the channel. And most importantly, I'd love to hear in the comments kind of other solutions that you came up with, and kind of what your thoughts on how console works and maybe other objects you've seen around the JavaScript environment work. What we're going to do in the next video is go through an object called map that's built into JavaScript that is kind of a slightly different take on how objects work and has its own special use cases that we can use for things where an object might not be the most appropriate thing. So I'm super excited to get to that. I'll see you in the next video.